02:45 a.m. Moscow was celebrating. Just days before, Russian commanders had openly bragged about their precision offensive that successfully crippled 14% of Ukraine's power grid. They believed they held the high ground in the energy war. But military history is written not by the powerful, but by the clever. And at 02:45 a.m., a report marked urgent landed on a desk in Moscow. The feed showed a sprawling $200 million substation in Belgorod, the very anchor of Russia's so-called invincible border grid, being systematically taken apart. Not by cruise missiles, not by a strike package of F-16s, but by a swarm of drones that cost less than a brand new Toyota Camry. Here is the central mystery that had Russian generals screaming into their encrypted phones that freezing morning. Those FPV drones have a flight range of approximately 10 miles. The substation they just obliterated was located 186 miles deep inside Russian sovereign territory. So, how did a swarm of short-range drones appear deep inside one of the world's most heavily defended airspaces, right under the nose of the legendary S-400 and the Pantsir S-1 systems? At precisely 2:30 a.m., just 15 minutes before the first strike sequence, 3 utterly ordinary-looking logging trucks pulled over. They stopped at 3 separate pre-planned coordinates, each position carefully selected to be just inside the drone's critical 10-mile strike range of the Belgorod target. On the surface, they were the perfect boring disguise. Each truck was piled high with a genuine heavy load, 3 tons of real timber. They were registered with local Russian license plates. In a region where logging is a massive industry, they were instantly forgettable. Except they weren't carrying logs. Each truck was a self-contained mobile launch pad. Wrapped beneath the heavy canvas, invisible to the casual observer, was a specialized thermal blanket. This blanket masked the majority of the vehicle's heat signature, turning the massive diesel truck into a cold, unremarkable blob to any passing Russian patrol or thermal sensor. The mission's flight plan was not entrusted to human pilots. It was pure, terrifying artificial intelligence. For the 48 hours prior to the launch, a dedicated Ukrainian AI system had run thousands of complex simulations. Imagine Tesla's autopilot, but instead of learning to avoid potholes, it was learning every single radar blind spot, every possible crosswind, and every minute variation in the landscape for a high-speed military race. The AI analyzed high-resolution Maxar satellite imagery. It calculated for the punishing conditions, including fierce 15-mile-per-hour crosswinds, and it plotted a route that would maintain an exact altitude, 50 feet off the ground. This was low enough to hug the Earth's natural curvature, keeping the drones completely invisible to the powerful, long-range Nebo-M radar's Doppler filters. Inside the sealed containers of the trucks, there were no pilots necessary. A single encrypted command arrived via a hidden Starlink terminal. With a barely audible hiss, hydraulics engaged, and a precisely cut section of each container's roof slid silently open. One by one, 18 specialized Shrike drones lifted off into the freezing fog. Their electric motors made barely a whisper against the howling wind. These were the Snow Ninjas, small, cold, and utterly lethal, embarking on a one-way mission. Back at the command post for the S-400 battery, the Russian operators, likely dreaming of their next warm meal, saw absolutely nothing. For 6 full critical minutes, the swarm was a ghost. They were invisible, perfectly adhering to the AI-plotted route. Then, at 02:36 a.m., the illusion shattered. A flicker on a screen at the primary Nebo-M radar station was instantly flagged as an anomaly. The alert flashed across the command screens at the nearby Pantsir S-1 command post. Here, a human Russian operator saw what the automated filtering system was missing. 6 targets, flying too fast, too low, and in a formation far too perfect for any mere flock of birds. The Russian playbook for an unidentified border incursion is simple, direct and brutally expensive. Overkill. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A single button press launched 2 massive 57E6 missiles. These weren't cheap. They were streaks of fire that cost as much as a brand new Mercedes-Benz and moved at 3 times the speed of sound. They found their targets, resulting in 2 brilliant explosions lighting up the frozen night. A textbook interception, a successful kill. It was also a textbook trap. This apparent victory triggered the precise chain reaction the Ukrainian planners had predicted. Believing the primary air threat was neutralized, Ground Command immediately dispatched 2 heavy Ural 4320 trucks filled with soldiers to hunt for the Phantom Commandos they assumed were operating the drones. While the Russian ground forces chased shadows in the snow, the real killers, the 16 remaining Shrikes, slipped past in the generated chaos, utterly invisible. The Russian ground commander's moment of celebration lasted exactly 2 minutes. At 02:38 a.m., just as they were reporting the successful kills, the real attack began. It wasn't a kinetic strike, it was a ghost. A searing signal from a sophisticated French-made Thales jamming system slammed into the Panzer's radar unit with the force of a digital flashbang. On the tactical screens inside the command vehicle, the entire world dissolved into a blizzard of blinding white static. The Russian operators were instantly totally blind. And while they were blind, the drone swarm danced. The main body of the swarm instantly executed a perfect pre-programmed beam maneuver, turning a precise 90 degrees. They were now flying perpendicular to the radar's last known position, a highly effective technique that minimizes a target's radar signature to near zero. Simultaneously, their guidance signal began an advanced electronic warfare technique, frequency hopping. The signal was jumping across 100 different radio channels every single second. Trying to lock onto this transmission would be like trying to catch a ghost that changes its form with every blink. This was a level of electronic warfare mastery the Russians simply did not expect from what they dismissed as a cheap quadcopter. But the worst was yet to come. The problem wasn't just in the airwaves, it was in the air itself. The brutal 28-degree temperature was attacking the very hardware of Russia's defense system. The lithium-ion batteries inside the Panzer system, critical for powering the turret's high-speed movement, were not designed for the punishing Russian winter. They were freezing. Power output suddenly plummeted by 25%. The massive turret, which needed to whip around instantly to track emerging targets, suddenly felt sluggish, like it was moving through molasses. The operators were now fighting a two-front war. They were blind from the jamming, and their weapon was literally freezing to death around them. All they could do was stare at a useless screen, left to wonder what kind of birds could fly in perfect formation at 60 miles per hour through a snowstorm and simply vanish from the most advanced radar systems in the world. On the ground, the Russian operators were blind, deaf, and rapidly freezing. But Russia's vast military machine has many eyes, and one of them was staring down from 30,000 feet. An A-50 AWACS, a flying command post equipped with radar eyes that can spot a fighter jet 250 miles away, had been patrolling its standard orbital track far above the chaos. Its primary mission was not to look for tiny, low-flying drones. Its powerful look-down radar was designed to track entire squadrons of NATO fighters. But the A-50 had another, more fundamental sensor at its disposal. It was hunting for heat. Against the uniform, sub-zero cold of the vast Russian landscape, 3 tiny anomalies glowed white-hot on the AWACS's advanced thermal display. These weren't the drones, they were the command trucks. The massive diesel engines, still radiating a searing 160 degrees Fahrenheit from their recent journey, stood out against the frozen earth like 3 burning embers on a sheet of white paper. The thermal blankets were successful in hiding the trucks from ground patrols, but they couldn't hide them from an eye in the stratosphere. The critical thermal data flashed from the A-50 directly to a regional command center. There, a furious Russian commander finally saw his chance to reverse the night's humiliation. He wasn't just going to destroy the launch source, he was going to capture it. The response was immediate and terrifying. 2 K-52 Alligator attack helicopters lifted off from a nearby airbase. Their coaxial rotors violently beat the cold air into submission. These were not lumbering transport vehicles. They were true apex predators designed for rapid, devastating ground attacks. Their millimeter-wave radar began slicing relentlessly through the thick fog, painting the terrain below in a ghostly, high-resolution thermal image. Trailing cautiously behind them, a heavier Mi-8 transport helicopter followed, carrying a dedicated fire team, 6 elite Spetsnaz soldiers, and 2 attack dogs ready for extraction. The hunters were loose, and they were closing fast. Inside one of the camouflaged logging trucks, the 2 Ukrainian operators watched their mission clock ticking down on their console. The drones had just 3 minutes of battery life left to find their targets and successfully complete the strike. Then they heard it, a faint, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp in the distance. It was a sound that was absolutely not part of the wind, and it was growing steadily, terrifyingly louder. A quick glance at their own tablet, networked to passive acoustic sensors, confirmed their worst fear. Helicopters. 2 of them. and they were heading directly for their position. Panic threatened to overwhelm them. The drivers slammed the multi-ton truck into gear, attempting a desperate escape, but the wheels only spun, whining uselessly. During the hasty setup hours earlier, they had backed into a deep snowdrift, and the 2-foot-deep powder now held the massive vehicle in an icy, inescapable grip. They were stuck, trapped in a metal box, miles from safety, with the sound of approaching death getting louder every second. The mission clock was still ticking down, but a much faster, much more final clock had just started, their own survival. The Russians thought they had them perfectly cornered, a bear trapping a fox in its den. It was a classic fatal mistake. They hadn't seen the whole picture. They had just walked right into the second and far deadlier part of the Ukrainian trap. The moment the approaching helicopters appeared on their acoustic sensors, the Ukrainian operators didn't succumb to panic. They executed. This entire scenario, being discovered, being hunted by elite Spetsnaz, was not a failure of their master plan. It was the final, crucial step. A single encrypted command was sent from their console, not to their own stuck truck, but to the third logging truck, positioned strategically a mile and a half away. Instantly, the decoy truck roared to life. Its tires churned aggressively through the snow, achieving enough traction to start moving. The Russian Ka-52 pilots, peering through their advanced thermal sights, saw exactly what they expected: a large, hot, and fleeing target. They banked hard, locking on and giving aggressive chase. They were apex predators who had just seen their prey break cover, a simple, satisfying equation of capture. But the intense heat signature they were chasing wasn't a 160-degree diesel engine. It was a cheap 12-volt resistance heater wired ingeniously to a car battery and insulated to mimic the required temperature perfectly. It was a brilliant, devastating piece of misdirection. It was the corporate equivalent of a phishing email that successfully tricks a company's entire security team into chasing a phantom while the real hackers are calmly walking out the front door with the server. The instant the Ka-52 helicopters were successfully diverted, the back door of the real command truck swung open. The two operators plunged without hesitation into the waist-deep snow, the frigid air burning their lungs as they sprinted a pre-measured 150 yards to a position they knew by heart. Waiting for them was an old UAZ Hunter military SUV. It had been parked there overnight, its engine block thoroughly soaked in the sub-zero environment. To the thermal-gazing helicopters now chasing the heater-equipped decoy, the UAZ was completely invisible, just another cold rock in a field of white. In a fluid, lightning-fast 30-second drill, they threw their critical control console and its precious hard drives into the back of the rugged UAZ. The engine, specifically designed for exactly these punishing conditions, coughed once and then roared to life. But this was not merely an escape. This was the launch of the final decisive phase of the attack. As the UAZ violently sped away, not toward the main road, but down a barely visible hidden logging trail known only to locals, the operator in the passenger seat continued the mission. The back of the UAZ had been surgically converted into a hyper-efficient mobile launch station. The rear hatch popped open, and the final crucial drones were launched into the night from the moving vehicle. They were tethered to the mobile console by an incredible 5-mile-long spool of hair-thin fiber-optic cable. This connection rendered the drones completely immune to the jamming systems that had crippled the Panzer. The UAZ was now a ghost, controlling a swarm of smaller ghosts while escaping at 50 miles per hour. This wasn't just a rugged SUV, it was a mobile server rack on wheels, a last-mile delivery system for destruction. Minutes later, 6 heavily armed Spetsnaz soldiers expertly rappelled from their Mi-8 transport helicopter. They stormed the decoy logging truck with textbook, flawless precision. They kicked down the doors, ready to capture the high-value targets who had so deeply humiliated their air defense systems. Instead, the elite soldiers found a cheap single 12-volt space heater, a GPS spoofer, and a single USB stick plugged into a small speaker blaring a defiant remix of a Ukrainian folk song on endless loop. The Russians had scrambled attack helicopters, elite soldiers, and a flying command center to catch a ghost. In the end, all they captured was a toaster oven. And miles away, speeding down a hidden border trail, the real operators were about to deliver the final killing blow. 02:45 a.m. Moscow time. The lead drone, now just feet from its target, made its final micro-adjustment. Its INS GPS navigation system, a piece of targeting technology so precise that if Leica made guided bombs, this would be it, locked onto the precise geometric center of Transformer 2. This was the absolute heart of the $200 million substation. The Shrike wasn't just hitting the building, it was performing open-heart surgery with a 1-pound fragmentation warhead. For the Russian grid operators who had boasted that Ukraine's power was a switch they could simply flip off, their own system was about to be put into a permanent deep freeze. The impact was silent for a fraction of a second. The drone's M732 fuse was intentionally set with a critical 0.8-second delay. This timing allowed the warhead to successfully punch inside the thick transformer's housing before detonation. It was the difference between gently knocking on a heavy door and kicking it down from the inside. What happened next was a brutal physics lesson. The blast wave, with an explosive force equivalent to about 2 pounds of TNT, was trapped violently within the substation's heavy concrete walls. Crucially, the cold, dense 28-degree air acted as a natural supercharger, amplifying the blast pressure to nearly double its normal force. It's the very same principle that makes a turbocharger work in a high-performance engine, only this engine was designed purely for destruction. The super pressurized wave hit the building's internal support columns not as a mere push, but as a shattering, instantaneous blow. They didn't bend, they disintegrated into dust. Less than a second later, the massive steel truss roof, having lost all its foundational support, folded inward, collapsing catastrophically on top of the delicate control systems and turbines below. Physics 101. Don't build a critical multi-million-dollar substation on your border unless you are prepared for it to become the world's most expensive and coldest tomb. Miles away, the Spetsnaz team leader made perhaps the most humiliating radio call of his entire career. Their high-value asset acquisition had netted them a cheap space heater, a GPS spoofer, and a USB stick blasting a defiant folk song into the frozen night. Thousands of miles above, an American intelligence satellite making its scheduled pass captured the entire sequence in 12 high-resolution frames. The first frame showed 3 intact trucks, the middle frame showed the Ka-52s chasing a perfect decoy, the final frame showed an 80-foot crater where the substation used to be, and the faint thermal track of a single UAZ disappearing seamlessly over the border. The explosion at 02:45 a.m. was not the end of the story. It was just the very beginning of a strategic collapse that immediately rippled through the entire Russian war machine in the region. The lesson learned that frozen November morning was brutal, expensive, and devastatingly clear. In modern warfare, the winner is no longer the side with the biggest, most expensive weapon. It is the side that is clever enough to turn a simple logging truck into a precision launch platform. It is the side that can turn a cheap 12-volt heater into a perfect decoy. And it is the side that can turn a simple drone platform into a weapon of mass disruption. It's the side that can wake Putin up from his dream of a grand Russian empire. This is the new reality of the conflict.